There is a sound that American ground troops in every conflict since 1991 have described in almost identical terms. Not a roar, not a boom. A sound like a very large piece of canvas tearing in half, except louder than any fabric could possibly be, lasting only about a second before fading into the distance. That sound is the GAU-8 Avenger 30mm rotary cannon firing from the nose of an A-10 Thunderbolt II at 900 rounds per minute. And if you are an American soldier pinned down under enemy fire, it is the most reassuring noise you will ever hear in your life. If you are an enemy combatant, it is the last sound many people heard before they died. In the spring of 2026, that sound is echoing again over a theater of war, not in the mountains of Afghanistan or the deserts of Iraq, but over the waters of the Strait of Hormuz and above the plains of Iraq, where A-10 Thunderbolt I's are hunting and killing Iranian fast-attack watercraft and striking Iran-backed militia forces as part of Operation Epic Fury, the largest American air campaign in over 2 decades. The A-10 was supposed to be retired. The Air Force has been trying to send it to the boneyard for years, replaced by the F-35, made obsolete by modern air defense systems, too slow and too visible for the contemporary battlefield. Congress kept blocking the retirement. Ground troops kept demanding the aircraft stay in service. And now, in the middle of the most intense combat operations the American military has conducted since 2003, the Warthog is back in the fight, doing things it was never originally designed to do, and proving once again that 50 years of institutional knowledge about close air support and persistent ground attack is not something you can simply replace with a software update on a 5th-generation fighter. This is the full story of the A-10 Thunderbolt II. We begin where the aircraft is right now, in active combat over the Persian Gulf region. Then we go deep into everything that makes the Warthog what it is: its technology, its systems, its weapons, and the design philosophy that has kept it flying for nearly 5 decades. And then we trace its history from the very beginning, from the painful lessons of Vietnam and the Cold War fear of Soviet tank formations rolling through Western Europe, through every combat deployment the aircraft has ever flown, all the way to the contested waters of the Strait of Hormuz in 2026. When Operation Epic Fury began on February 28, 2026, with coordinated American and Israeli strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, air defense networks, ballistic missile infrastructure, and military command centers, most of the world's attention focused on stealth bombers, carrier-based fighters, and long-range cruise missiles. Those were the weapons making the headlines, penetrating defended Iranian airspace and striking hardened underground facilities. But within the first 48 hours, U.S. Central Command quietly confirmed something that caught many analysts by surprise. A-10 Thunderbolt I's were in the fight from the very beginning. CENTCOM's initial confirmation on March 1, 2026, described A-10s being employed during the first 24 hours of operations against Iranian targets. The aircraft were integrated into the initial strike wave, indicating missions requiring sustained close air support, armed overwatch, and engagement of dispersed targets in a contested regional environment. At a time when the Air Force had been arguing for years that the A-10 was too vulnerable and too slow for modern warfare, here it was, flying combat missions in the opening hours of the most significant American military operation since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The early missions focused primarily on targets accessible to the A-10 without requiring it to enter heavily defended Iranian airspace. The aircraft, flying from Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, was conducting operations against Iran-backed Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq and defending against Iranian drone and missile attacks threatening American bases throughout the region. Video released publicly in mid-March 2026 shows the A-10's distinctive GAU-8 cannon firing at night, the long trail of muzzle flash visible in the darkness as the aircraft engaged PMF targets north of Tikrit in Iraq. The sound of that cannon, even through a low-quality video recording, is unmistakable. On March 15, 2026, CENTCOM released the first official photographs of A-10 Thunderbolt IIs operating in support of Epic Fury, showing the aircraft refueling from KC-135 Stratotanker tankers over the Central Command Area of Responsibility. The images were significant not only as confirmation of the aircraft's involvement, but because of what they revealed about its combat configuration. The A-10s visible in the released photos were carrying a mix of weaponry that reflected the multi-dimensional nature of the campaign. On the starboard wing, Lightning advanced targeting pods and AGM-65 Maverick air-to-surface missiles. On the port wing, AIM-9M Sidewinder air-to-air missiles for self-protection against drones and helicopters, and LAU-131 7-round rocket pods, loaded with APKWS-2 Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System guided rockets. On the centerline hardpoint, a 600-gallon external fuel tank for extended range and loiter time. It was a configuration that said the aircraft was prepared to strike fixed and mobile ground targets, defend against aerial threats, and stay overhead far longer than any fighter aircraft in the inventory. CENTCOM's accompanying message on the release was pointed. The A-10 Thunderbolt II can loiter for hours, standing by and ready to execute a mission whenever needed. The role expanded significantly on March 19, 2026, when General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, made an announcement during a Pentagon briefing that caused immediate ripples through both the defense community and the ongoing debate about the aircraft's retirement. The A-10 Warthog is now in the fight across the southern flank, Kane said, and is hunting and killing fast-attack watercraft in the Strait of Hormuz. This was something genuinely new. The A-10 had been designed as a tank killer. It had served for decades as a close air support platform for ground troops. It had evolved into a counter-terrorism tool over Afghanistan and an anti-ISIS platform over Iraq and Syria. But maritime interdiction, specifically hunting and destroying the fast, low-signature Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps watercraft that had been threatening commercial shipping and sowing chaos in the world's most critical energy choke point, was not in the original job description. And yet the operational logic was immediately clear to anyone who understood the aircraft's fundamental characteristics. Iranian tactics in the Strait of Hormuz rely heavily on swarm attacks by small, fast, highly maneuverable craft, often armed with rockets, mines, short-range anti-ship missiles, or simply serving as launch platforms for suicide attacks against tankers and warships. These targets are difficult to engage from high altitude at high speed. An F-35 traveling at several hundred knots at medium altitude has very limited time to visually acquire, positively identify, and engage a small, fast-moving boat before it is out of weapons employment range. The A-10, flying slow and low, can loiter over the strait for extended periods, watch the surface below with its targeting pod, positively identify individual vessels, and engage them repeatedly across multiple weapon passes. The APKWS-2 rockets that the A-10s carried in their Epic Fury loadout were particularly well suited to the maritime interdiction mission. The Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System converts standard 2.75-inch Hydra 70 unguided rockets into laser-guided precision weapons by adding a semi-active laser seeker kit between the rocket motor and the warhead. The result is an inexpensive, lightweight guided weapon that is highly effective against small vehicles, boats, radar sites, and light armor. At a fraction of the cost of a Maverick missile, APKWS rockets allow an A-10 to engage multiple small maritime targets in a single pass before transitioning to cannon fire for final engagement. The cost-effectiveness calculus was significant in a campaign where military analysts were already noting that using $100,000 missiles to shoot down $100 drones was economically unsustainable. By late March 2026, A-10s were also being used in a counter-drone role, a mission that had been quietly developing since at least 2025, when A-10s deployed to the Middle East, returned from Operation Inherent Resolve, with kill markings on their fuselages showing Shahed-style Iranian kamikaze drone silhouettes. The APK-WS-2, in its AGR-20F variant, known by the designation Falco for Fixed-Wing Air-Launched Counter-Unmanned Aerial Systems Ordnance, is the same weapon used by F-15E Strike Eagles and F-16s against Iranian drones in the CENTCOM area of responsibility. Equipped with proximity fuzzing optimized for aerial targets, the weapon detonates near a drone with enough force to destroy it without requiring a direct hit. The A-10, with its ability to loiter overhead for extended periods, and its stable gun platform allowing precise aim with the targeting pod, proved well suited to maintaining persistent counter-drone coverage over American bases and friendly positions. The broader strategic picture of the A-10's involvement in Epic Fury illustrates something that military analysts and ground commanders had been arguing for years in the face of Air Force institutional resistance to keeping the aircraft in service. High-end fifth-generation aircraft like the F-35 and F-22 are extraordinary platforms for penetrating defended airspace, defeating enemy fighters in beyond visual range engagements, and striking hardened targets with precision munitions from standoff range. They are not designed or optimized for the sustained, close, persistent, visually demanding mission of hunting small, mobile targets, whether those targets are a truck carrying a rocket launcher in a Kurdish village or an Iranian fast-attack boat weaving through the shallow waters off Qeshm Island. That mission requires an aircraft that can stay low, stay slow, stay up for a long time, look carefully, and hit precisely with a range of weapons, from a large gun to a cheap rocket to a guided missile. As of March 2026, there is still only one aircraft in the American inventory that was designed specifically to do all of those things at once. The congressional protection of the A-10 fleet from Air Force retirement efforts crystallized most recently in the National Defense Authorization Act of December 2025, which barred the use of fiscal year 2026 funds to retire aircraft below a floor of 103 airframes, was vindicated in real time by the Epic Fury deployments. Senior fellows at defense think tanks who had advocated for keeping the aircraft described its performance as a wake-up call. The Defense One report from late March 2026 captured the consensus. A-10s are proving their worth in exactly the kind of hybrid, multi-domain, operationally ambiguous environment that modern warfare increasingly produces. The kind of fight that does not fit neatly into the scenarios that drove procurement decisions toward the F-35. It is worth noting that current evidence does not suggest A-10s are flying missions over Iranian territory itself. Iran's air defenses, while heavily degraded by the opening phases of Epic Fury, retain some residual capability, and the A-10's low and slow flight profile that makes it so effective in permissive environments makes it correspondingly vulnerable to any surviving surface-to-air missile systems. Its optimal refueling altitude of between 15,000 and 22,000 feet, at roughly Mach 0.48, is significantly different from the F-35's refueling profile of 20,000 to 30,000 feet at Mach 0.80, which complicates its integration into long-range strike packages over Iranian territory. The aircraft is doing what it does best, operating in the areas around the periphery of the campaign, doing the persistent, grinding, necessary work of protecting flanks, hunting mobile targets, killing boats, shooting down drones, and keeping the pressure on militia forces that would otherwise have freedom of movement. That may not be as dramatic as a B-2 Spirit dropping a bunker-busting bomb on an underground nuclear facility, but it is essential, and no other aircraft currently in service does it as well. To understand why the A-10 is the way it is, you need to understand the philosophy that produced it. The aircraft is not a compromise. It is not a multi-role platform designed to perform several missions acceptably. It is a single-mission weapon optimized for one task with a completeness and single-mindedness that has very few parallels in the history of American military aviation. Everything about the A-10, from its engines to its landing gear to the location of its cockpit to the material from which its pilot seat is made, was chosen to support one overriding mission: survive in a low-altitude environment filled with enemy fire and destroy what is below you. The aircraft measures 53 feet, 4 inches in length, stands 14 feet, 8 inches tall, and has a wingspan of 57 feet, 6 inches. It is powered by two General Electric TF34 GE 100 turbofan engines, each producing 9,065 pounds of thrust, for a combined thrust of just over 18,000 pounds. The twin-engine configuration was chosen not for raw performance but for survivability. An aircraft with two engines can lose one and still fly home. The positioning of those engines is equally deliberate. They are mounted high on the rear fuselage, well above the wing line, separated from each other and from the main fuel tanks and flight control systems by significant distances. This layout dramatically reduces the probability that a single hit to the aircraft will damage both engines simultaneously. The high mounting also reduces the infrared heat signature visible to ground-based missile seekers, since the hot exhaust is partially masked by the airframe when viewed from below. Maximum speed is 450 knots at sea level, or about 518 miles per hour. This number requires context. The A-10 is not a fast aircraft by the standards of modern military aviation. An F-35 can exceed Mach 1.6, nearly twice the speed of sound. The A-10 cannot break the sound barrier under any conditions, but speed was never the point. The service ceiling is 45,000 feet, and the combat radius on a close air support mission with a 1 hour and 53-minute loiter time at 5,000 feet is 250 nautical miles. On an anti-armor mission with sea-level penetration and exit and 30 minutes of combat, the radius is 252 nautical miles. The ferry range with external tanks is over 200 nautical miles. Maximum takeoff weight is 51,000 pounds. Empty weight is approximately 29,000 pounds. Fuel capacity is 11,000 pounds internally, with provision for additional external fuel tanks. Payload capacity is 16,000 pounds, distributed across 11 hardpoints, 8 under the wings and 3 under the fuselage centerline. The hardpoint arrangement gives the aircraft enormous flexibility in weapons carriage. A full air-to-ground configuration can include Maverick missiles on multiple stations, Hydra rocket pods or APKWS guided rockets, a variety of guided and unguided bombs, and self-defense Sidewinder missiles. The aircraft can carry combinations of weapons simultaneously, tailoring its loadout to specific mission requirements, with a flexibility that no single hardpoint design could match. But the heart of the A-10, the feature that defines everything else about the aircraft, is not its engines or its hardpoints or its fuel capacity. It is the gun. The General Electric GAU-8 Avenger is a 30mm hydraulically driven 7-barrel Gatling-type rotary autocannon. It is the most powerful aircraft cannon ever installed on a production combat aircraft. It is also, by any reasonable measure, one of the most remarkable pieces of engineering in American military aviation history. The GAU-8 fires 30 by 173mm rounds at a sustained rate of 900 rounds per minute. The barrels spin through 2 complete revolutions per second, and each barrel fires once per revolution, producing a rate of fire so fast that the individual shots blend into a continuous sound that has become one of the most recognizable acoustic signatures in all of military aviation. The entire gun assembly, correctly designated the AA-49E6 gun system, consists of the gun itself weighing 620 pounds, the ammunition feed system, and a 5-foot 11-inch ammunition drum that can hold up to 350 rounds, though it is typically loaded with 174 rounds in combat operations. The complete assembly weighs 4,029 pounds with a maximum ammunition load. That figure, over 4,000 pounds just for the gun system, represents approximately 16% of the A-10's empty weight. The gun is so heavy and so forward-mounted that a maintenance jack must be placed under the aircraft's tail whenever the cannon is removed for servicing to prevent the aircraft from tipping backward. The installation geometry of the GAU-8 is a masterpiece of engineering precision. The gun is mounted slightly to the port side of the aircraft's fuselage centerline, not centered. This is not an accident or a compromise. The barrel of the GAU-8, that is in the firing position at any given moment, is not the barrel on the geometric axis of the cylinder. The gun is a rotating assembly, and the firing barrel is the one at the 9 o'clock position as viewed from the front. By offsetting the gun slightly to port, the engineers ensured that the firing barrel, the barrel actually discharging rounds, aligns precisely with the aircraft's aerodynamic centerline. This matters enormously because the recoil force of the GAU-8 at full firing rate is 10,000 pounds force, which is slightly greater than the thrust output of one of the A-10's two engines. If the firing barrel were not aligned with the aircraft's center of mass, the recoil torque would push the nose sideways during firing, disrupting aim. The offset installation eliminates that problem. The front landing gear, notably, is positioned to the starboard side of the centerline to accommodate the gun placement, a design choice that gives the aircraft its slightly asymmetric ground stance. Accuracy of the GAU-8 system is exceptional. When fired at a range of 4,000 feet, 80% of rounds fired impact within a 40-foot diameter circle. The 30mm shell has twice the effective range, half the time to flight, and 3 times the mass of projectiles fired by comparable close air support aircraft. The muzzle velocity is 1.067 meters per second, comparable to the 20mm M61 Vulcan used by most American fighter aircraft. But the GAU-8 round is dramatically heavier, making it far more destructive on impact and far more resistant to wind drift over long ranges. The ammunition is as carefully engineered as the gun itself. 2 primary ammunition types are used in combat operations. The PGU-14B depleted uranium armor-piercing incendiary round is the primary anti-armor projectile. Depleted uranium is approximately 1.7 times denser than lead and nearly as dense as tungsten. When a depleted uranium penetrator strikes armor, it does not mushroom and spread impact force as conventional steel rounds do. Instead, it self-sharpens under the deformation of impact, boring through armor plate in a way that maintains penetrating efficiency at greater depths. The PGU-14B can penetrate up to 69 millimeters of rolled homogeneous steel armor at typical combat ranges, which is sufficient to defeat the frontal arc of older Soviet-era tanks and the side and rear armor of virtually all armored vehicles. The PGU-13D high-explosive incendiary round is used against softer targets, personnel in the open, light vehicles, radar equipment, and similar targets where the kinetic penetrator of the depleted uranium round is not necessary. The ammunition drum's double-ended feed system recycles spent casings back into the drum rather than ejecting them from the aircraft. This is a pure engineering decision. A gun firing at 3,900 rounds per minute produces enormous quantities of empty brass in very little time. Ejecting those casings through ports in the aircraft's skin would require considerable mechanical force to avoid damage, and the mass of expelled casings creates a measurable effect on the aircraft's trim. The recycling feed system eliminates both problems, maintaining the aircraft's center of gravity more consistently during a firing burst, and simplifying the airframe design around the gun installation. Despite the GAU-8's dominant presence in both the aircraft's design and its public identity, the A-10 is much more than a flying cannon. Its weapon suite encompasses the full range of precision and unguided munitions that have been integrated over nearly 5 decades of continuous development and upgrade. The AGM-65 Maverick is the A-10's primary standoff precision weapon. The Maverick is an air-to-surface guided missile available in multiple variants, including the AGM-65B with electro-optical television guidance, the AGM-65D with imaging infrared guidance, the AGM-65G, with an imaging infrared seeker optimized for large targets like ships and infrastructure, and the AGM-65H, with a charge-coupled device color television seeker for improved target discrimination. The Maverick's guidance system allows pilots to lock onto a target before launch and then guide the weapon autonomously to impact while the aircraft maneuvers clear. This standoff capability is critical in modern combat environments, where approaching too close to the target area exposes the aircraft to small arms fire, anti-aircraft artillery, and man-portable air defense missiles. During Operation Desert Storm in 1991, A-10s launched 90% of all AGM-65 Maverick missiles fired in the entire conflict. The A-10C configuration, which represents the current standard for all operational aircraft, integrates a suite of precision-guided munitions that would have been unrecognizable to the pilots who flew the original A-10A in 1977. The aircraft can carry GBU-12 Paveway, 2 laser-guided bombs in the 500-pound class, GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack munitions with GPS and inertial guidance, GBU-54 laser JDAMs that combine GPS inertial guidance with a laser seeker for terminal precision, and GBU-39 small-diameter bombs that allow the aircraft to carry a larger number of individually lighter precision munitions for use against time-sensitive targets, where multiple The integration of the wind-corrected munitions dispenser gives the aircraft a precision-guided cluster munitions capability for area suppression missions. The AGM-154 Joint Standoff Weapon extends the aircraft's strike range by allowing glide bomb attacks from outside the immediate target area threat envelope. The Hydra 70 rocket system, now upgraded with the APKWS-2 guidance kit, represents a particularly important capability evolution. The baseline Hydra 70 is a 2.75-inch unguided, folded-fin aerial rocket that has been in American military service since the 1950s. The APKWS conversion adds a semi-active laser seeker module between the rocket motor and the warhead, transforming an unguided area weapon into a precision-guided munition at a fraction of the cost of a Maverick missile. An A-10 carrying multiple LAU-131 pods can deploy dozens of individually guided rockets in a single sortie, engaging a large number of small targets like vehicles, radar antennas, observation posts, boats, and light field fortifications with precision and at relatively low cost per engagement. In the current Epic Fury operating environment, where Iranian fast attack craft and drone launch teams represent dozens of small individual targets spread across a wide geographic area, the economics of APKWS make the A-10 a particularly efficient platform. For air-to-air self-defense, the A-10 carries up to 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder infrared-guided missiles. These provide meaningful self-protection capability against helicopters, slow-moving attack aircraft, and unmanned systems, though the A-10 carries no radar and is not optimized for beyond visual range air combat. Pilots rely on external information from AWACS aircraft and data links to be cued toward aerial threats before they can employ the Sidewinder. Despite the lack of organic radar, the A-10 has a confirmed air-to-air kill record. On February 6, 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, Captain Robert Swain shot down an Iraqi Mi-8 helicopter using the GAU-8 cannon, scoring the first air-to-air kill by an A-10 and, as it turned out, the last air-to-air kill by an American aircraft using guns in combat. A second Iraqi helicopter was destroyed by another A-10 during the same campaign. The survivability engineering of the A-10 is as important to the aircraft's success as its weapons. The aircraft was designed from the beginning on the assumption that it would be hit repeatedly during combat missions over defended territory. Not that it might be hit, that it would be hit regularly and sometimes severely, and that it must be capable of absorbing that damage and still completing the mission and returning the pilot safely to base. The titanium armored cockpit, universally referred to as the bathtub, is the most visible expression of this philosophy. It is a tub-shaped structure surrounding the pilot and extending to cover critical portions of the flight control system. The titanium plates vary in thickness from 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches, with the varying thicknesses determined by a careful analysis of likely threat trajectories and deflection angles at different positions around the cockpit. The entire bathtub weighs 200 pounds, representing nearly 6% of the aircraft's empty weight. It is tested and certified to withstand direct strikes from armor-piercing rounds up to 23 millimeters in diameter, the caliber of the Soviet ZSU-234 Shilka self-propelled anti-aircraft gun that represented one of the primary threats to low-altitude attack aircraft during the Cold War era. The front windscreen is independently certified to withstand up to 23 millimeter projectile impacts. Any interior surface of the bathtub that faces the pilot is additionally covered by a multi-layer nylon spall shield that captures and absorbs metallic fragments that might be generated by a partial penetration of the outer armor. The redundant flight control system is another expression of the same design philosophy. The A-10 has dual hydraulic systems for operating its control surfaces, separated from each other by the fuel tanks that run along the aircraft's center fuselage. The physical separation means that a single hit to the aircraft is unlikely to sever both hydraulic lines simultaneously. If both hydraulic systems are compromised, the A-10 can be flown in manual reversion mode, using mechanical backup connections that bypass the hydraulic actuators entirely and allow the pilot to control the aircraft through direct mechanical linkage. It is more difficult to fly in manual reversion and requires more physical effort from the pilot, but it works, and it has saved aircraft and pilots on multiple occasions, including the famous April 7, 2003 incident during Operation Iraqi Freedom, when Captain Kim Campbell flew her heavily damaged A-10 for nearly an hour in manual reversion after taking severe flak damage over Baghdad that destroyed one engine and crippled both hydraulic systems. She landed safely. The fuel system is equally hardened against battle damage. Self-sealing fuel cells line all 4 main tanks, with reticulated polyurethane foam filling both the inner and outer surfaces of the tanks to retain debris and restrict fuel spillage when the tank is penetrated. Check valves prevent fuel from flowing into a compromised tank from an intact one. The refueling system is purged after use to eliminate ignitable vapors. If all 4 main tanks are rendered non-functional by combat damage, 2 separate self-sealing sump tanks provide enough fuel for 230 miles of flight, giving a damaged aircraft enough range to reach a friendly field, or at minimum, a safe ejection altitude over friendly territory. The engine placement, high on the rear fuselage and widely separated from each other, serves multiple survivability functions beyond the infrared signature reduction already mentioned. The separation between the engines means that shrapnel from a hit on one engine is unlikely to travel far enough to damage the other. The high mounting positions the engines above most ground fire trajectories at typical combat altitudes. The wide nacelles partially shield the hot engine core from direct observation by infrared seekers at certain look angles. And the engines are shielded from the rest of the airframe by firewalls and fire extinguishing systems that contain any engine fire and prevent it from spreading to adjacent structures. The airframe itself was designed with multiple redundant primary structural sections. The aircraft can sustain significant battle damage to almost any single component while maintaining sufficient structural integrity for continued flight. An A-10 has returned to base with 1 engine, half a tail, an elevator destroyed, landing gear damaged, and multiple hydraulic failures, all from a single sortie. These are not hypothetical scenarios from engineering simulations. They are documented combat incidents. The aircraft can operate from surfaces that would be impossible for conventional military aircraft. The wide, low-pressure tires can handle grass, dirt, gravel, and damaged paved surfaces without damage or loss of control. The landing roll distance is short enough to operate from improvised airstrips close to the front line. The simple design and interchangeable parts, including engines, main landing gear legs, and vertical stabilizer panels that are identical left to right, dramatically reduce the maintenance burden and allow field repairs that would be impossible on more complex aircraft. An A-10 can be refueled and rearmed in the field with minimal ground support equipment. turning around for another combat sortie in minutes rather than hours. The avionics of the A-10C represent a complete transformation from the original analog systems of the A-10A. The Precision Engagement Upgrade Program, begun in 2005 and completed across the entire fleet by the end of the decade, replaced the original analog cockpit with a modern digital suite that brought the aircraft's weapons employment and situational awareness capabilities into the 21st century. The upgraded cockpit features two multifunction color displays, hands-on throttle and stick controls that keep the pilot's hands on the primary flight controls while accessing weapons and sensors, a digital stores management system that tracks all weapons and allows precise control of their employment, and a digital moving map display that gives the pilot continuous awareness of geographic position relative to friendly forces, no-fire zones, and known threat locations. The system integrates with GPS and inertial navigation for precise positioning in any weather and lighting condition. The Lightning Advanced Targeting Pod, integrated as part of the Precision Engagement Upgrade, is perhaps the single most transformative addition to the aircraft's capability. The Lightning combines a forward-looking infrared sensor, a charge-coupled device daylight television camera, a laser rangefinder, a laser designator for guiding laser-seeking weapons, and a laser illuminator for marking targets for other aircraft. The pod gives the A-10 the ability to detect, identify, and engage targets at ranges and under lighting conditions that were impossible for the original aircraft's analog systems. At night, the infrared sensor allows the pilot to fly low and slow over a complex battlefield and see vehicles, personnel, heat sources, and other targets as clearly as in daylight. The laser designator allows the aircraft to guide not only its own laser-guided weapons, but also laser-guided munitions dropped by other aircraft, filling the forward air controller role that the A-10 designation was created to describe. The Sniper XR targeting pod, an alternative to Lightning used by some units, provides similar capabilities with a mid-wave forward-looking infrared sensor, dual-mode laser, and a color television system. The Situational Awareness Data Link and Variable Message Format Communication Suite allow the A-10C to share targeting data with other aircraft, with ground forces, and with command and control networks in real time. A pilot who has identified and designated a target can pass the precise coordinates and sensor imagery to a distant strike aircraft or to ground-based fire control systems without requiring any voice communication. This network capability, absent from the original A-10A, is a fundamental part of how the aircraft integrates into modern joint operations and makes it far more effective than its raw platform capabilities alone might suggest. The Precision Engagement Upgrade also integrated GPS-guided weapons for the first time, giving the aircraft the ability to engage targets in weather and visibility conditions where laser guidance is impractical. The JDAM family of GPS-guided bombs allows the A-10 to strike fixed targets with precision through clouds, smoke, and darkness, eliminating the dependence on clear line of sight between the designating sensor and the target that all laser-guided weapons require. Electronic countermeasures on the A-10C include an ALQ-131 electronic jamming pod, typically carried on one of the wing hardpoints, an ALR-69 radar warning receiver that alerts the pilot to radar emissions from surface-to-air missile systems and other threats, and an ALE-47 chaff and flare dispenser system that releases infrared decoys and radar-reflecting chaff to defeat incoming guided missiles. The combination does not make the A-10 invisible to modern air defense systems, but it gives pilots warning of threats in time to react and means of defeating those threats once warned. One final element of the A-10's design deserves special attention, because it captures the philosophy of the aircraft better than any specification number can. The bubble canopy that covers the cockpit provides the pilot with an almost completely unobstructed view in all directions, including downward at steep angles. Most combat aircraft have significant blind spots in the forward lower hemisphere, caused by the aircraft's nose structure and the framing of the canopy. The A-10's canopy is designed to minimize these restrictions precisely because the aircraft's mission requires the pilot to look straight down at the target area during attack runs, to visually confirm target identification, and to maintain situational awareness of the battlefield geography immediately below the aircraft throughout the engagement. A pilot who cannot see what is below and around the aircraft cannot safely execute the close air support mission without risking friendly fire. The A-10's canopy is one of the best in any current military aircraft for downward visibility, and that characteristic is a direct expression of the primacy of the close air support mission in every element of the aircraft's design. The story of how the A-10 came to exist is inseparable from two of the most painful experiences in American military aviation history: the failure of conventional jets to provide effective close air support in Vietnam, and the growing realization through the 1960s and early 1970s that the Soviet Union was building armored forces in Europe on a scale that Western ground troops simply could not stop without devastating air support. The post-war American military had largely abandoned the dedicated ground attack mission. After World War II, when the P-47 Thunderbolt and its contemporaries had demonstrated the enormous tactical value of heavily armored, low-flying aircraft carrying large cannon and bomb loads in direct support of ground troops, the military turned its attention to nuclear delivery, strategic bombing, and the high-speed jet fighters that both missions required. The practical art of close air support, of getting slow and low and watching what was happening on the ground and responding with precision fire when requested by troops in contact with the enemy, was treated as a secondary consideration. The aircraft that were assigned to the CAS mission, high-speed jets like the F-100 Super Sabre and later the F-4 Phantom, were fundamentally optimized for other roles and performed the CAS mission with significant limitations. Vietnam exposed those limitations in the starkest possible terms. The jungle terrain made ground targets extremely difficult to see from fast-moving aircraft at medium altitude. The one-pass, haul-ass doctrine that jet attack pilots adopted because they were too fast to loiter over a target area without becoming vulnerable to ground fire meant that target acquisition was rushed, confirmation of hits was impossible, and second runs required the time-consuming process of establishing a new attack profile from a safe distance. The Douglas A-1 Skyraider, a propeller-driven holdover from the Korean War era that should, by all reasonable expectations, have been obsolete, proved dramatically more effective at close air support than any of the jets assigned to the mission. It could loiter, it could slow down to make careful target identifications, it could carry enormous ordnance loads and make repeated passes. It could take hits from ground fire and keep flying. The Air Force and Marine Corps lost 266 A-1s in Vietnam to ground fire, a rate that was unacceptably high. But the Skyraider's effectiveness in the mission demonstrated clearly what close air support required and why no current jet aircraft was providing it. The Israeli Air Force's devastating success with ground attack aircraft in the June 1967 Six-Day War added urgency to the American analysis. Israeli aircraft flying low-altitude strikes against Egyptian, Syrian, and Jordanian armor demonstrated that well-executed close air support could determine the outcome of a ground campaign in hours. The aircraft and tactics used in those strikes, emphasizing precision, low altitude, high rates of fire, and the willingness to accept battle damage while pressing attacks home, pointed toward requirements that the American Air Force was not meeting. On December 22, 1966, the Air Force issued a Requirements Action Directive for the AX program, the Attack Experimental Program, and stood up a dedicated program office to develop specifications for a new close air support aircraft. On March 6, 1967, the Air Force released a request for information to 21 defense contractors asking for design studies for a low-cost attack aircraft. The initial concept was broad, but the lessons of Vietnam and the Six-Day War were already shaping the requirements. In 1969, the Secretary of the Air Force asked Pierre Sprey to write the detailed specifications for the AX project. This was a controversial choice. Sprey was a French-born defense systems analyst and one of the group of reform-minded thinkers associated with fighter pilot and theorist John Boyd, who had waged a lengthy internal battle within the Air Force for more capable, less expensive aircraft. Spray's involvement in the FX program, which ultimately produced the F-15, had been controversial enough that his involvement in the AX was kept secret. but his combination of analytical rigor, access to the combat experience of A-1 Skyraider pilots in Vietnam, and deep familiarity with the lessons of historical close air support operations made him the ideal person to define what the new aircraft had to do. Spray interviewed every Vietnam-era Skyraider pilot and forward air controller he could find. He studied the Soviet Ilyushin Il-2 Sturmovik of World War II, the most heavily produced military aircraft in history, and the aircraft that the Soviet armored doctrine feared most from the air. He studied the German Henschel HS-129, the dedicated anti-tank aircraft that had pioneered the use of heavy cannon against armored vehicles in the Western Desert and on the Eastern Front. And he built a set of requirements around what those historical examples in contemporary operational experience demanded: long loiter time over the target area, low-speed maneuverability for precise target acquisition, and multiple attack passes, massive cannon firepower that could destroy Soviet-era armor on a single engagement, extreme survivability to allow continued operations after taking battle damage, and simplicity of maintenance to permit high sortie rates from forward bases near the front lines. The specifications issued in May 1970, after an additional refinement of the AX concept, were specific and demanding. Maximum speed of 460 miles per hour, a figure chosen to be fast enough to transit to the target area efficiently while remaining slow enough to maneuver precisely during attacks. Takeoff distance of 4,000 feet, permitting operations from damaged runways and short forward airstrips. External payload of 16,000 pounds, providing enough weapons carriage flexibility to address multiple target types in a single sortie. Mission radius of 285 miles, sufficient to cover Central European battlefields from forward bases. And a unit cost of $1.4 million, reflecting the requirement for a platform that could be fielded in sufficient numbers to have decisive effect against mass Soviet armor, without consuming the entire defense budget. The 1970 specifications also locked in the most unusual requirement in the entire AX program. The aircraft would be designed specifically around a new 30mm rotary cannon that the Air Force issued a parallel development request for at the same time. The gun came first. The aircraft was required to accommodate it. This reversed the usual engineering sequence of fitting weapons to a finished airframe design and resulted in the unique arrangement of the A-10's fuselage, landing gear, and crew station that everyone who has ever seen the aircraft recognizes immediately. 6 companies submitted aircraft proposals to the final request for proposals deadline. 2 were selected to build competing prototypes for a fly-off evaluation: Northrop, whose proposal became the YA-9A, and Fairchild Republic, whose proposal became the YA-10A. 2 prototype aircraft of the YA-10 were built in Fairchild Republic's Farmingdale, New York facility. The first flight took place on May 10, 1972, piloted by Howard Sam Nelson. The competing prototypes were evaluated against each other in a fly-off at Edwards Air Force Base beginning in late 1972. The YA-9 was a more conventional design: high wing configuration, inline engine placement, single vertical stabilizer. The YA-10 was more unusual: straight low-mounted wings, rear-mounted engines positioned well apart on the upper fuselage, twin vertical tail fins, and a layout that subordinated every aerodynamic and structural consideration to the requirements of carrying the GAU-8 gun and surviving battle damage. On January 18, 1973, the Air Force announced the selection of the YA-10 for production. General Electric was simultaneously selected to build the GAU-8 cannon. The YA-10 underwent a further evaluation in 1974 against the Ling-Temco Vought A-7D Corsair II, the principal USAF attack aircraft of the time, to confirm that the new design justified its development cost over simply improving the existing A-7. The YA-10 demonstrated sufficient superiority in the close air support mission to proceed. The first production A-10A flew in October 1975. Deliveries to the Air Force began in March 1976, when the 355th Tactical Training Wing at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona received the first aircraft. Initial operating capability was declared by the 354th Tactical Fighter Wing at Myrtle Beach Air Force Base, South Carolina, in October 1977. Production deliveries continued through 1984, with a total of 715 aircraft produced. The aircraft received its official name in a deliberate homage to its purpose and lineage. Thunderbolt II connected it to the Republic, P-47 Thunderbolt of World War II, the premier American close air support and ground attack aircraft of that conflict, and the product of the same Long Island manufacturer, Fairchild Republic, being the successor to the original Republic Aviation. The more common nickname, Warthog, or simply Hog, arose organically within the Air Force units that flew it, continuing a tradition within Republic's family of aircraft that stretched back through the F-84 Thunderjet, nicknamed Hog, the F-84F Thunderstreak, nicknamed Super Hog, and the F-105 Thunderchief, nicknamed Ultra Hog. The aircraft's reputation within the Air Force during its early years was not universally positive. The Air Force culture of the 1970s was dominated by the fighter pilot community, and a slow, ungainly-looking aircraft that could not exceed the speed of sound and was explicitly designed to fly low and absorb ground fire was not the kind of platform that attracted prestige or promotion prospects. The aircraft was sometimes referred to internally with dismissive humor. The saying "go ugly early," which described the tactical decision to call in A-10 support early in a ground engagement, rather than waiting for faster aircraft that might not arrive in time, captured both the aircraft's visual distinctiveness and the ambivalence with which the Air Force establishment initially regarded it. During the Cold War years from 1977 through the late 1980s, the A-10 fleet was primarily forward deployed in West Germany and the United Kingdom, positioned to respond to a Warsaw Pact armored thrust through the Fulda Gap and across the North German Plain. Forward operating locations in Germany at Leifheim, Sembach Air Base, Norvenich Air Base, and RAF Alhorn were maintained by rotating detachments of A-10s from the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing, based at RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge in England. The operational concept envisioned A-10 pilots flying multiple sorties per day against Soviet tank columns, accepting high attrition rates among the aircraft in exchange for the devastation they would inflict on armored formations before those formations could break through to more vulnerable rear areas. The aircraft was never used in this role, but the doctrine, training, and tactics, developed for European anti-armor operations, formed the foundation for everything the A-10 would do in the decades that followed. The Air Force began reconsidering the A-10's place in its force structure in the late 1980s, as improved Soviet air defense systems made the low-altitude anti-armor mission appear increasingly dangerous. Proposals emerged to transition A-10 units to the F-16, using the Paveclaw GPU-5/A gun pod housing a 4-barrel GAU-13 derivative of the GAU-8 to provide a CAS capability from the faster aircraft. Testing of this concept in 1988 proved disappointing. The F-16's higher speed and less stable gun mounting gave the GPU-5/A dramatically worse accuracy than the full GAU-8 installation in the A-10. The pod performed poorly against point targets, and the F-16's higher operating speed gave pilots less time to acquire and engage targets during attack runs. The concept was abandoned, and the A-10 survived its first serious retirement attempt. Before the Cold War threat scenario could ever materialize in Europe, the A-10 found itself flying its first actual combat missions in a very different environment. Operation Desert Storm began on January 16, 1991. For the Air Force, it was the first large-scale conventional air campaign since the Vietnam War. And for the A-10 community, it was the moment of validation that the aircraft had been waiting for since it entered service. The threat environment in the Gulf theater was unlike anything the A-10 had been designed for. The Saudi and Kuwaiti desert provided none of the terrain masking that European operations would have offered. Iraqi air defense systems, while not as capable as the most advanced Soviet systems deployed to East Germany, were extensive, including SA-2, SA-6, SA-8, and Roland surface-to-air missile systems, as well as thousands of anti-aircraft guns, from small-caliber automatic weapons to 57mm guns capable of engaging the A-10 at medium altitude. Iraqi forces occupied Kuwait with the largest armored concentration the American military had faced since the Korean War, over 4,000 tanks, thousands of armored personnel carriers, and dense concentrations of artillery and motorized infantry. A total of 165 A-10s and OA-10s from 5 different units participated in Operation Desert Storm, all organized under the 354th Provisional Wing, with 144 aircraft maintained in the forward operating inventory at any time, and the remainder serving as replacement airframes. The scale of deployment reflected the Air Force's commitment to the close air support and anti-armor missions despite the institutional ambivalence toward the aircraft. The initial employment of the A-10 force was not the low-altitude anti-armor work the aircraft had been designed for. The Iraqi air defense environment was sufficiently dangerous in the early days of the air campaign that A-10s were initially restricted to higher altitude operations, flying battlefield air interdiction missions against targets in the Iraqi rear area rather than close air support for ground troops. This was frustrating for the pilots, who understood their aircraft was optimized for low and slow work, but it was operationally rational given the density of Iraqi air defense systems in the early phases of the campaign. As the sustained air campaign suppressed Iraqi air defenses over the following weeks, A-10 operations evolved to take advantage of the aircraft's design capabilities. Pilots developed tactics for medium-altitude Maverick employment that allowed them to engage tanks and armored vehicles at ranges that kept them outside the threat envelopes of most Iraqi air defense systems, while also finding windows where low-altitude gun runs remained viable against targets where the Maverick's engagement geometry was unfavorable. The results were historic. Over the course of the air campaign and the 4-day ground war, A-10s destroyed more than 900 Iraqi tanks, over 2,000 other military vehicles, and approximately 1,200 artillery pieces. They fired 90% of all AGM-65 Maverick missiles expended in the conflict. They flew 8 775 total sorties, maintaining a mission-capable rate of 95.7%, 5 percentage points higher than the aircraft's peacetime maintenance rate, a remarkable demonstration of the simplicity and ruggedness of the design. The A-10 had the highest sortie rate of any Air Force aircraft in the theater, accounting for 16.5% of all USAF sorties in the Gulf. The air-to-air kills deserve special mention. On February 6, 1991, Captain Robert Swain of the 706th Tactical Fighter Squadron engaged an Iraqi Mi-8 transport helicopter with the GAU-8 cannon over Kuwait. The helicopter was destroyed, making it the A-10's first air-to-air kill and the first gun kill by an American military aircraft since the Korean War. A second Iraqi helicopter was destroyed by another A-10 pilot later in the campaign. These engagements illustrated the aircraft's versatility in ways the original design specifications had not fully anticipated. The losses were real but not catastrophic for a campaign of this intensity. 6 A-10s were destroyed in combat, and approximately 70 aircraft sustained some form of battle damage during operations. 4 shootdowns occurred within 4 days in February 1991. On February 2, Captain Richard Dale Storr was shot down by surface-to-air missile fire, ejected safely, was captured, and was later released. On February 15, Lieutenant Robert Sweet was shot down, captured, and released. Also, on February 15, Captain Stephen Phillis was shot down and killed when his aircraft impacted the ground. On February 19, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Fox was shot down by an SA-9 surface-to-air missile, ejected with injuries, was captured, and was released on March 5. 2 additional A-10s were lost in other incidents, including 1 aircraft that was badly damaged by anti-aircraft artillery and crashed while attempting to land at King Khalid Military City Airport, killing the pilot during the landing attempt. The aftermath of Desert Storm produced a paradox that would define the A-10's institutional relationship with the Air Force for the following 3 decades. The aircraft had performed brilliantly by almost every measurable metric. exceeding expectations for mission effectiveness and proving its unique value in the anti-armor and close air support roles. Yet the Air Force's post-Gulf War analysis emphasized the limitations more than the successes. The aircraft had been vulnerable to the air defense environment early in the campaign. The original low-altitude doctrine had been abandoned in favor of medium-altitude operations that reduced effectiveness with the cannon. A leaked statistic, later shown by independent analysis to be significantly inflated, claimed that 70% of A-10s had suffered battle damage during the campaign, which was used to argue for the aircraft's vulnerability. The Air Force almost immediately abandoned plans to replace the CAS-configured F-16s with dedicated A-10 improvements, and began looking for ways to reduce the A-10 fleet. The close air support community and ground troops pushed back. Army and Marine commanders who had watched A-10s destroy the Iraqi Republican Guard and save American lives during the ground war were not willing to accept the Air Force's institutional desire to divest the platform. The argument over the A-10's future, between the Air Force that wanted to retire it and the ground troops and their congressional allies who wanted to keep it, had begun. It would continue without interruption for the next 35 years. The Balkans of the 1990s provided the next combat environment for the A-10. The wars in the former Yugoslavia represented a completely different operational challenge, from Desert Storm, complex terrain, politically constrained rules of engagement, an adversary that actively sought to exploit civilian infrastructure as cover, and an international coalition with varying levels of resolve and capability. A-10s fired approximately 10,000 30mm rounds in Bosnia and Herzegovina between 1994 and 1995, supporting NATO operations against Bosnian Serb forces that had been conducting ethnic cleansing campaigns and attacking UN-safe areas. On August 5, 1994, two A-10s located and strafed a Bosnian Serb anti-tank vehicle near Sarajevo after Serb forces seized impounded weapons from a UN-controlled warehouse in Ilidza and attacked a UN helicopter. The strikes were precise and consequential. After the engagement, the Serbs agreed to return the remaining seized weapons. In August 1995, NATO launched Operation Deliberate Force, the coordinated air campaign that ultimately forced the Bosnian Serbs to the negotiating table. A-10s flew close air support missions against Bosnian Serb artillery positions and military infrastructure throughout the campaign. A-10s returned to the Balkans in March 1999 as part of Operation Allied Force, the 78-day air campaign against Serbian forces in Kosovo. The Kosovo campaign was operationally demanding for A-10 pilots in ways that Bosnia had not been. The Serbian air defense network, while not as comprehensive as Iraq's, included modern surface-to-air missile systems, and the weather over Kosovo was frequently terrible, forcing aircraft to operate in conditions that reduced visibility and complicated target identification. In March 1999, A-10s escorted and supported combat search and rescue helicopters, sent to find the pilot of an F-117 stealth bomber shot down over Serbia, the only combat loss of that aircraft type. Over the following months, A-10 pilots worked through the difficult challenges of identifying and engaging Serbian ground forces that had learned to disperse, camouflage, and hide within civilian areas to minimize their vulnerability to air attack. The A-10s remained in the campaign until combat ended in late June 1999, with their first successful attack in the operation coming on April 6. The Kosovo experience produced some of the most detailed and self-critical analysis of A-10 operations ever conducted within the Air Force community. The book A-10s over Kosovo, written by the pilots themselves, documented both the genuine successes of the campaign and the significant challenges they faced, including the difficulty of finding and confirming valid military targets in complex terrain, the constraints imposed by coalition rules of engagement, and the evolution of Serbian tactics in response to air attack. That intellectual honesty about the aircraft's limitations as well as its strengths would inform doctrine and training in the years that followed. The September 11, 2001 attacks and the subsequent American military response created the conditions for the most sustained and intensive use of the A-10 in its history. The global war on terror, encompassing operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and numerous smaller theaters across the Middle East and Africa, would occupy the aircraft for 2 decades and ultimately produce a combat record that no amount of institutional Air Force skepticism could dismiss. During the initial invasion of Afghanistan in October 2001, A-10s did not take part in the opening operations. The air campaign in those first weeks was dominated by heavy bombers, cruise missiles, and carrier-based fighters striking Taliban command facilities, air defense systems, and known al-Qaeda infrastructure. But beginning in March 2002, as the campaign transitioned from the initial regime decapitation phase to the sustained counterinsurgency and counterterrorism campaign that would continue for the next 19 years, A-10 squadrons began deploying to Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan and to bases in Pakistan for Operation Anaconda, the first major conventional ground operation of the war. Operation Anaconda in March 2002 brought A-10s into sustained combat in the rugged mountain terrain of eastern Afghanistan's Shah-e-Kot Valley, where elements of the 101st Airborne Division and other coalition forces were conducting operations against dug-in al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters. The terrain was demanding, and the air support mission was demanding. Identifying individual fighters on steep, rocky mountainsides at altitude, distinguishing them from non-combatants, and responding to urgent calls from ground troops in contact, while maintaining awareness of the complex three-dimensional geometry of the battlefield. The A-10s performed the mission, and their ability to loiter overhead for extended periods while maintaining radio communication with ground controllers proved as valuable as their weapons in the complex environment. A-10 units rotated through Afghanistan continuously from 2002 onward. Between 2009 and 2012, A-10s flew between 27, 834, 500 sorties annually in Afghanistan and Iraq combined, maintaining a pace of operations that no other aircraft type in the Air Force inventory matched. In the first half of 2013 alone, A-10s flew 11,189 sorties in Afghanistan. From the beginning of 2006 through October 2013, A-10s flew 19% of all close air support operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, more than the F-15E Strike Eagle, and more than the B-1B Lancer, exceeded only by the F-16, which flew 33%. Congress noted in formal legislative language that A-10s flew 32% of all combat sorties in both Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom across their full duration. The 2003 invasion of Iraq brought 60 A-10s and OA-10s into combat from the opening days of operations. The urban combat environment of Baghdad and other Iraqi cities presented the same challenges in an even more compressed and politically sensitive form than Afghanistan. The April 7, 2003 engagement that produced Captain Kim Campbell's famous manual reversion landing illustrates both the intensity of the combat environment and the effectiveness of the A-10's survivability design. Campbell's aircraft was hit by a barrage of Iraqi anti-aircraft fire over Baghdad, destroying one engine and crippling both hydraulic systems. She flew the heavily damaged aircraft in manual reversion for nearly an hour before landing safely at her base. It was the kind of damage that would have destroyed most other military aircraft. The A-10 brought its pilot home. The only A-10 shot down during the entire Iraq War was lost on April 8, 2003, struck by an Iraqi Roland surface-to-air missile near Baghdad International Airport. The pilot survived. This was the 7th and final combat loss of an A-10 airframe in the aircraft's history up to that point. The combat survivability record, 7 complete aircraft destroyed in combat across thousands of sorties over 3 decades, was remarkable by any measure of comparison with other aircraft types. The A-10C upgrade, the precision engagement configuration that represents the current standard, first deployed to Iraq in September 2007 with the 104th Fighter Squadron of the Maryland Air National Guard. The digital avionics, improved targeting pods, and precision-guided munitions integration transformed the aircraft's effectiveness in the counterterrorism and counterinsurgency environment. Where the original A-10A had been largely limited to visual target acquisition and unguided or laser-guided weapons, the A-10C could now receive targeting data via data link, employ GPS-guided weapons in poor visibility, and integrate seamlessly with the joint targeting networks that had grown up around the American military's experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. In March 2011, the Libyan civil war brought 6 A-10s into action as part of Operation Odyssey Dawn, the coalition military intervention to protect Libyan civilians from Muammar Gaddafi's forces. The A-10s participated in attacks on Libyan ground forces, providing the same persistent low-altitude ground attack capability that distinguished them in every previous deployment, against an adversary that lacked the air defense density that made similar operations more challenging in earlier conflicts. The rise of the Islamic State from 2013 onward created the largest sustained demand for A-10 operations since the peak of the Afghan and Iraq wars. Operation Inherent Resolve, the military campaign against ISIS, launched in August 2014, incorporated A-10S from its earliest phases. The 122nd Fighter Wing deployed 12 aircraft to the Middle East in late 2014, and from mid-November onward, A-10S were striking ISIS targets in central and northwestern Iraq on an almost daily basis. Over a 2-month period following that deployment, A-10s flew 11% of all Air Force sorties in the campaign since the start of operations. The ISIS campaign demonstrated the A-10's particular effectiveness in the urban close air support environment. Mosul, Fallujah, Tikrit, Raqqa, and Deir-ez-Zor were cities where ISIS fighters intermingled with civilian populations, using civilian infrastructure as cover, and where the difference between a successful strike and a disastrous friendly fire or collateral damage incident came down to the quality of target identification and the precision of weapons employment. The A-10's combination of long loiter time, excellent pilot visibility, and the option to use the cannon for surgical low collateral damage engagement when a missile or bomb would cause unacceptable surrounding damage made it consistently the preferred platform for the most demanding urban CAS missions. On November 15, 2015, 2 days after the ISIS terrorist attacks in Paris, A-10s and AC-130 gunships participated in Operation Tidal Wave 2, destroying a convoy of over 100 ISIS-operated oil tanker trucks in Syria that represented a major source of the organization's revenue. The strikes were precisely documented and represented one of the most economically significant tactical air operations of the entire anti-ISIS campaign. In October 2015, Operation Tidal Wave 2 also saw A-10s destroy 6 major ISIS oil facilities in Syria and several oil infrastructure targets in Iraq, significantly degrading the organization's financial infrastructure. The campaign against ISIS also produced statistics that illustrated the depth of the A-10's contribution. During one particularly intensive deployment from July to October 2017, the 74th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron flew 12 A-10s and successfully targeted 44% of all targets struck during that period, a figure that helped eliminate ISIS control from 99% of its former territory in Iraq and Syria. In December 2024, as the Assad regime in Syria collapsed and ISIS sought to exploit the resulting power vacuum, A-10s participated alongside B-52s and F-15E Strike Eagles in what the Air Force described as dozens of airstrikes against over 75 ISIS targets, strikes intended to prevent the organization from reconstituting its territorial control during the transition period. On December 19, 2025, A-10s participated in Operation Hawkeye Strike, a joint American and Jordanian operation that struck over 70 ISIS targets in Syria, with more than 100 precision munitions following the killing of 2 American soldiers and an interpreter on December 13. The A-10S in that operation carried 4 500-pound JDAM bombs, each in addition to their targeting pods and external fuel tanks. By late 2025, the A-10's evolving role in the counter-drone mission was becoming visible. Aircraft from the 124th Fighter Wing of the Idaho Air National Guard returned from a Middle East deployment with kill markings depicting Shahed-style Iranian kamikaze drones, confirming that A-10s had been modified to carry and employ APKWS-2 rockets in the counter-unmanned aerial systems role, and had successfully used them in combat against one-way attack drones in the CENTCOM area of operations. The nose art on one aircraft named Ares included 2 drone kill markings alongside markings indicating employment of the small diameter bomb and the GAU-8 cannon during the same deployment. An aircraft designed in the late 1960s to destroy Soviet tank columns in Central Europe was shooting down Iranian kamikaze drones over the Middle East, and doing so more cost-effectively than any of the aircraft that had been proposed to replace it. In March 2025, several A-10s from the 124th Fighter Wing were deployed to the Middle East as part of the ongoing pressure campaign against Houthi forces in Yemen, extending the aircraft's continuous presence in the CENTCOM area of responsibility. And then came Operation Epic Fury and the Strait of Hormuz, and the sound of that cannon echoing over Persian Gulf waters, where Iranian fast attack boats were trying to enforce a de facto blockade of one of the world's most critical energy choke points. General Dan Kane's briefing on March 19, 2026, confirmed that A-10s were hunting and killing those boats. It was a mission that the original designers of the A-10 had never contemplated. It was also, when you understood everything about the aircraft that the previous 5 decades had taught the people who flew and maintained it, completely logical. The A-10 Thunderbolt II has been scheduled for retirement repeatedly. In the late 1980s, the Air Force wanted to replace it with CAS-configured F-16s. The Gulf War killed that plan. In 2014, then Air Force Chief of Staff General Mark Welsh stated that the Air Force had to retire the A-10 completely to free up budget for F-35 procurement, claiming the divestment would save $3.7 billion over 5 years. Congress blocked the retirement. In 2015, Major General James Post told a group of Air Force pilots that any of them who went to Congress to lobby for the A-10's survival would be charged with treason. Post was removed from his position after an investigation ordered by Senator John McCain. In 2021, the Air Force requested permission to divest the entire fleet. Congress refused. In 2025, the Air Force's fiscal year 2026 budget request included $57 million to retire all remaining 162 A-10s. The December 2025 National Defense Authorization Act rejected the plan, barring retirement below 103 aircraft and mandating a multi-year transition plan. Every time the Air Force has tried to retire the A-10, a conflict has emerged to demonstrate why the aircraft is still needed. Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, ISIS, Iran. The pattern has repeated itself so consistently that it has become a central element of the aircraft's institutional identity, the airplane that keeps proving the Air Force wrong about when its time has come. As of March 2026, with A-10s actively flying combat missions over the Strait of Hormuz and the Iraqi plains, 162 aircraft remain in service. They are flown by Air Force active duty units, Air Force Reserve Command Squadrons, and Air National Guard wings. The aircraft that entered service in 1977 to fight a Cold War that never turned hot has instead fought every actual American war since 1991. In environments and against target sets that its designers never anticipated, using weapons and systems that were not invented when the aircraft was built. The F-35 will eventually replace the A-10. Technology will eventually produce an aircraft that combines the A-10's persistence, firepower, and survivability with stealth and speed. Ground troops will eventually have an overhead Guardian that can stay up as long and hit as hard and take as much punishment as the Warthog. But that day is not today. And until it arrives, somewhere over the contested waters of the Strait of Hormuz, or above the plains of Iraq, or over whatever war comes next, you will still hear that sound. A piece of canvas tearing. The most reassuring noise in the world. If you are the right person in the right place when you hear it.